welcome, Father Cyril. Now we are looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Now I know what does it mean in Sweden. Siesta, it means coffee hour. Good to know. And now I understand better what does it mean Swedish warmth. That's when it is almost an autumn outside in May and people are still very warm and welcoming. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you very much for allowing me to address such a distinguished audience. I feel really privileged, and actually I thought that probably this is the first time that I see how the WCC texts are received by the local communities. Because, this kind of reception, which I'm going to talk about, it's like, it's like a myth. Well, everyone speaks about it, but not many people saw it, actually. And I was always wondering, there are reports about reception of the ecumenical texts from the local communities, but, I didn't see them, actually, those communities discussing. And this is the first time that I see it, I should confess, even though I've been to many ecumenical meetings and heavily involved. And it's so pleasant, such a pleasure to see the outcome, actually, of our work at the WCC, how it is received, how it is discussed, and how it is taken seriously. So I just want to congratulate you on this, and this is really encouraging and inspiring. Today, I'm going to talk, as it was announced, about the paper, ecclesiological paper, The Church Towards a Common Vision, to which I was, to drafting, I was related to drafting of this text somehow, both as in the drafting groups and in the reception groups. But even though those reception groups that I participated was actually the Orthodox group, the group of the Orthodox theologians who met in Crete. Ayanapa, actually, a nice place, to discuss how this text, the draft of this text, could be received. And we actually were critical from the Orthodox perspective, and we tried to improve it, and it actually, the eventual draft of the text met those concerns and those reservations. But even then, the reception was not the reception by the people who are connected to the communities. The reception was discussed by the people who already participate in drafting processes, who are the members of this ecumenical club anyways. So it was a kind of, when within the same body of people, a part of the same body criticizes another part of the body. So it was not really a proper reception as we would expect. But nevertheless, it worked well, and I should say that the text met many reservations, many concerns that were expressed during the process of its reception. Another preliminary remark that I would like to say is that the Church is indeed profoundly ecclesiological. It is serious about ecclesiology, and I'm very glad that the Faith in Order is still serious about theology, about ecclesiology, even though I was inspired somehow by this, my ecumenical activities, to write my own book about ecclesiology, which is about to be published soon. And when I asked a colleague of mine, she works at the WCC, to have a look at this book, she said, "Well, ecclesiology again? No more ecclesiology," because people are so fed up with ecclesiology in the WCC, and I understand them completely, because this is really, as you mentioned, the words of John Gibault, a good friend, that ecclesiology is really a kind of software and operating system for ecumenical movement. At the same time, ecclesiology is something, at least for the people who serve ecumenical movement, minister it, it's a kind of obstacle sometimes, because they need to take into consideration all that ecclesiological stuff, and this really impedes them to move forward. And ecclesiology, in this sense, works in double way. It facilitates, on the one hand, the ecumenical developments and discussions, and on the other hand, ecclesiology can really be an obstacle, at least from the perspective of some churches. And regardless of these difficulties with ecclesiology that many people have, it is still there, and I'm very happy that it is included as a kind of framework for ecumenical progress, further ecumenical progress. This text is certainly, as an ecclesiological text, this text constitutes a kind of framework for the new stages of the ecumenical movement. That's why it is important. It cannot be considered as a kind of ecumenical, the core of the ecumenical message, so to say. It's not that this text is not a sort of protagonist of the ecumenical advance, but it is a very solid framework without which any ecumenical advance is impossible, I think. In this regard, this text is a continuation of the tradition. Well, but sometimes we like to speak about the tradition, especially with the Orthodox. We are obsessed, sometimes over-obsessed with the tradition, and we have infected our ecumenical brothers with the same idea of tradition. And this text is a sort of tradition that continues the tradition of other ecclesiological texts that began appearing at the beginning of the ecumenical era. And it's not a surprise that the 20th century, which is regarded as century of ecumenism, beginning with the Edinburgh Conference in 1910, was also branded as a century of ecclesiology. I think Otto Dibelius, the German theologian, Protestant theologian, first coined this term, the century of ecclesiology, and it is considered exactly so, as the century which is marked by the discussions about the nature and purpose of the church. So they emerged together, ecumenism and ecclesiology, and this is not obviously a coincidence. Perhaps ecumenism emerged because of the ecclesiology, and ecclesiology emerged because of ecumenism. So they came together, they still come together, and they have a kind of love-hate relationship still. But they cannot live without each other, obviously. So this text is a continuation of that long tradition of ecumenical ecclesiological texts that deal with the issue of the church, and that already traditional, the body that produces this kind of texts is the Faith and Order Commission of the WCC. Actually, the Faith and Order began producing ecclesiological texts from the period when it was a self-sufficient institution, before merging with before incorporating into the WCC, and it continued to be the main body responsible for ecclesiological reflections. On the way, well, if we consider this text as a part of the tradition, almost a century long tradition of ecclesiological texts, we should identify some predecessors of this text. Among probably the most important milestones on the way to producing this text was the BAM, the so-called BAM, Baptist Eucharist and Ministry text, or the Lima text, produced by the Faith and Order. It was adopted at the plenary commission of the Faith and Order in Lima, Peru in 1982. And the way how the BAM was produced is similar to the way how this text was produced. A long series of consultations preceded the BAM document. Thus, before Lima, It was discussed at the meetings of the Faith and Order in Accra in 1974, in Bangalore in 1978, and there were some minor meetings that preceded the Lima text. And what is important about the Lima text that it was widely received and well received by the churches. By the year 2000, it was translated into almost 40 languages and received officially by 190 churches. I think the rationale of this text, which we are discussing, the Church Towards a Common Vision, was to achieve the same kind of reception that the BAM enjoyed. It is still an ambition, it is still a desideratum. It has not been yet received in the same way, but I think the hope of the people who stood behind this text, our text, was exactly to repeat the success of the BAM. That's why it is important to keep the BAM in mind when we are discussing this text, because they are related, and the rationale behind this text is somehow repeating the rationale behind the BAM text. At the same time, this text is more ambitious, is envisaged as more ambitious than the BAM, because the BAM has been built on the frame of the sacraments, the three sacraments of the Church: baptism, Eucharist, and ministry, which are important, crucially important for understanding the nature and purpose of the Church. And at the same time, it's not the entire Church, it's not the whole Church, even those most important sacraments. That's why from the very beginning the BAM was somehow reduced to the sacramental ecclesiology. The ambition of this text is to widen the framework, the ecclesiological framework, and to put the Church to a wider frame, to consider the Church from a broader perspective. And those perspectives are the Trinitarian ecclesiology based on the Holy Trinity, which is very emphatic in this text. Also, as it was mentioned by in the introduction, another frame is the communion ecclesiology, which is a broader version of ecclesiology than the ecclesiology employed by the BAM, by the sacramental ecclesiology. So the ecclesiological frame laid down to the foundation of this text is broader than the frame behind the BAM. Hopefully it will not harm the reception of the Church, of this Church. There is another document, except the BAM, which should be taken into consideration when we consider this text, and which continued the BAM. It is the text One Baptism Towards Mutual Recognition, which is a further detailization of the BAM with a focus on baptism. What are the implications of the BAM in regard to achieving the unity of the Church? Well, probably even this text, the Church Toward a Common Vision, will require the same kind of specific, more focused texts on how to put all those nice ideas woven to the text, to the fabric of the text, how to explicate them and how to make them working for the Church unity. Because this text is a bunch of good wishes, obviously, but now how to put those wishes to reality, and probably some more explications, more texts will be required to address these implications. As it was mentioned, this text is a convergence text. It is important to understand what does it mean, the convergence text. I think the convergence text as a genre emerged at the time of the BAM, and the BAM is a convergence text. It was probably one of the earliest instances of the convergence texts in the ecumenical tradition. And in terms of updates, in terms of modernization, or how to say, in terms of refining of this genre of convergence text, I think the Church Towards a Common Vision is a kind of the top success, the most updated version of the convergent texts ever. So this tradition started with BAM. It continued with another text, ecclesiological text, which I'm going to talk about more later on, Nature and Mission of the Church. And it continued up to this text, which is kind of the most perfect instance of the convergence texts. So as it was mentioned, the convergence texts, they try to bridge and to address two rather incompatible wishes. First is the wish to achieve Christian unity, and the other is to preserve Church's own traditions. How to bridge those unbridgeable things? Well, presumably unbridgeable things. It's the most important probably task of the Faith and Order and the ecumenical movement. And the convergence texts, they were designed exactly to address this problem, as instruments of bridging these two agendas. So the convergence texts, they, on the one hand, recognize self-sufficiency, accomplishment of the local ecclesial traditions and their ecclesiologies, and on the other hand, try to extract the points where those traditions converge with each other. I'd like to quote the words of former acting director of the Faith and Order, Thomas Best, who defines the convergence texts as a genre that focuses, I quote him, focuses on points at which the churches are approaching another in their understanding and practice. Those involved are expected to remain true to their ecclesial identities and convictions, even as they seek understandings and formulations to express ecclesial truths, which are yet deeper than the issues which divide us. So the convergence texts, on the one hand, they recognize the differences. On the other hand, they say that we need, despite all those differences, we need to go to the unity. And, well, the hope of the convergence text is that the desire for unity is stronger than the desire to keep our own traditions. Well, obviously, we need to somehow to combine two desires, but they are not equal. So the arithmetics of the convergence text is that, yes, the one part of the equation is that, well, we need to keep traditions. The other part of the equation is that we need to achieve unity. And this is not exactly an equation, because the desire to achieve unity should be stronger, bigger, larger than the desire to achieve, to preserve our own tradition. So that is more or less the mathematics of the convergence texts, I would say. And this is exactly a sort of mathematics which is embodied in the text that we are discussing now. I've mentioned that there was a text, another convergence text, which was very important, the nature and mission of the Church. This document was adopted in 2005, and I think the ambition of this document, nature and mission of the Church, was exactly the same that the ambition of this Church. The nature and mission of the Church, in the same way, tried to broaden the perspective, the framework of the BAM. It tried to address the issue of the nature and mission of the Church, which are larger, broader than just the three sacraments of the Church. But I think that document somehow failed. When we discussed this document in the Orthodox group as a process of reception of this text, we were always referring to the nature and mission of the Church as an example how probably the new text should not be dealing with, with the issues of the ecumenical movement and ecclesiological issues. So, in some sense, this text is a second attempt to address the issues which were addressed by the nature and mission of the Church, the document which failed to address those issues in an acceptable way. I find personally, I like the nature and mission of the Church. I think it is a very good document, a great document. But unfortunately, for some reason, it failed. It failed a reception which would be wide enough. And I think my impression is that this text is exactly, it appeared because the previous text failed as a second attempt. That's why so much importance was placed to the reception, to make this text discussed widely, something that was not done to the nature and mission of the Church, and to make it more known in the churches on the grassroots level. So when considering this text, I think we also need to have in mind a part of the BAM, which is the departure point. We also need to have in mind this milestone of the nature and mission of the Church as a kind of failure of the reception, something that this text tries to amend, tries to improve. And I should also say that even the nature and mission of the Church, this text of 2005, it was not the first attempt of broadening the framework. The first attempt was even early in 1998 with the text "The Nature and Purpose of the Church," and it didn't receive much acceptance in the Church either. So essentially, this text tries to overcome this pertinent, innate problem of the ecumenical texts, the problem of the reception. And the reception seems to be really crucial for the ecumenical texts. And this text to be received is completely entirely the task of the churches. So that's exactly what we are doing here. We are just boosting this document by discussing and by accepting it or rejecting it. Oh, thank you so much. As I said, all these convergence texts, they deal with, they acknowledge at least, the existing divergences. Convergence means that there are divergences. So by the way of speaking about convergence of the different traditions, the texts, the convergent texts, they simultaneously recognize that there are divergences. And this is, I think, very important. It's not because I'm very much fond about differences between the church, and I want to, or colleagues of mine want to stress the differences between the churches. Well, some of Orthodox, they like to stress differences between the churches just in order to avoid all these discussions about the church unity. We have differences, we are happy about them, and, well, we don't care about the church unity. I think this is a completely wrong approach. It is wrong to appreciate differences. It is wrong to make differences an excuse not to talk to each other. But it is also wrong to ignore differences as a way of dealing with differences. I think this is something that many ecumenical texts before the BAM and before the nature and mission of the Church failed to do, and that's why, well, who remembers them now? Because they were not accepted, because they were too over optimistic, they were not dealing with the differences in a proper way. And I think this is something that this text and other convergence texts has tried to avoid rightly. In other words, if we want to speak seriously about unity, if we want to be serious about convergence of the traditions, we need to be serious about the differences. And hence is the entire discussion about the legitimate and illegitimate diversities, which is kind of a core of the discussion on the divergences. The discussion about the legitimate and illegitimate differences or diversities, I think it is similar to the way in which we recognize the differences between the traditions. We make a discerning work. We discern between the differences that can be accommodated within unity and the differences that cannot be accommodated within unity. We can disagree about what exactly differences can be accommodated and cannot be accommodated, but at least we agree on the idea that there are differences that can be accommodated and cannot be accommodated. This is, I think, an important achievement of this text as well. Me personally, I do not always concur with my Orthodox colleagues that say that there are differences which are just cannot be, tolerated, within the unity, because things change. Every meaningful study of the church history indicates that nothing is a kind of constant in the church. If we explore his history of the church, we find how many things which were believed, as a kind of dogma, changed afterwards and became received afterwards, and things which were received earlier, later on, were rejected as an absolute, wrong thing. So we still can discuss many things which we reject as Orthodox say, as things which cannot be accommodated within unity, and we can change our mind about this. But at least we recognize, and I think this is an achievement of this text, that both sides, the Orthodox side, the Catholic side also participate in the faith and order, but the Protestant side mostly, we agree that yes, there are two kinds of diversities in the church. And the divergence texts, they advanced, they became successful in the case of the faith or in the case of the nature and mission of the church, and in the case of this text, hopefully. After the Special Commission on the Orthodox Participation in the WCC, the commission, which was established in 1998 at the 8th General Assembly of the WCC in Harare, and that commission was a kind of crisis in the ecumenical movement, and it was supposed to address a crisis in the ecumenical movement, and at the same time it caused a crisis in the ecumenical movement, so it played a kind of double role. But I think the WCC managed that crisis quite well, and on the one hand, the concerns of the Commission were accommodated in the WCC, and the Commission, I think, it didn't speak the language of ultimatums, of take or go, not this kind of language. So even the Commission, it was also prepared to compromises, to find solutions to the problems that were raised. So it was a good example of collaboration of the Commission, of Special Commission of the Orthodox Participation with the WCC leadership at the time, and it worked well. And actually, this series of the convergence texts after Harare, after 1998, indicates how the Orthodox concerns became accommodated, and I think it indicated how beneficial for the entire ecumenical movement these convergence texts became. I'd like to say a few words about a way how the WCC made these long ecclesiological texts accepted in the wider community. Well, in the beginning, you asked the question, who read this text? And most people here in this room raise their hands. I just imagine if we come together to the General Assembly of the WCC and the same question is asked, I think approximately the same amount of people would raise their hands, because the texts are so long. And nowadays, people don't read more than the Twitter allows, And it's really hard to force people to read long texts. That's why the WCC, I think, adopted a wise policy of producing shorter ecclesiological texts, the so-called unity statements of unity, or unity statements, which are discussed at the General Assembly of the WCC and then accepted or amended. And which communicate the same kind of messages that the long texts do. This happened, for instance, at the assembly of the WCC, General Assembly of the WCC in 2006 in Porto Alegre, in Brazil. I remember I myself participated in that assembly, and I remember how hot was the discussion. I was too young at the time. I didn't understand many things, and for me it was a kind of chaos and a lot of noise. But now I understand and I appreciate more the way how those messages, ecclesiological messages, were communicated to those, not really understanding people like me, like I was at that time. And I think it worked. This text, the kind of abstract, or not an abstract, but messages from this text that we are discussing were taken and implemented to the unity statement adopted by the last General Assembly of the WCC in Busan in 2013. Actually, I had the privilege to work on the drafting group that drafted this unity statement for the General Assembly. We had an excellent collaboration. It was a group under Dame Mary Tanner, and she was excellent in moderating. And we actually, I can leak to you the inside information that we relied on this text, and we try to embody, to accommodate its ideas to that message. So those are, in other words, the techniques which are applied by the WCC to push the messages of unity to the communities, to the local communities. It's a hard task. I really admire those people who struggle so much to communicate those messages to the local churches, to the different backgrounds. It's like marketing. You can produce an excellent product, but yet then you need to do marketing. To convince the customers to buy those products. The same is with this text. We can produce excellent texts, but no one will buy them unless we do marketing. We convince customers, in this case the churches, to at least to read them, not necessarily to accept them. And I think the WCC does an amazing work in this kind of marketing process. As I said, and it was mentioned in the introduction, the text dwells a lot on the concept of koinonia, of communion, and indeed it continues a long tradition of employing the concept of koinonia in the ecumenical documents. This tradition goes back to as early as to New Delhi, the General Assembly of the WCC in New Delhi in 1961, and then it found its full expression in Canberra at the meeting of the General Assembly in Canberra in 1991. And I'd like to quote the statement from Canberra, which exactly employs the concept of koinonia, communion. I quote, "The unity of the Church to which we are called is a koinonia given and expressed in the common confession of the apostolic faith, a common sacramental life entered by the one baptism and celebrated together in one Eucharistic fellowship, a common life in which members and ministries are mutually recognized and reconciled, and a common mission witnessing to all people to the gospel of God's grace and serving the whole of creation. The goal of the search for full communion is realized when all the churches are able to recognize in one another the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church in its fullness. This full communion will be expressed on the local and the universal levels through conciliar forms of life and action. In such communion, churches are bound in all aspects of their life together at all levels in confessing the one faith and engaging in worship and witness, deliberation and action." So this is the language of koinonia, of communion, which was employed by the WCC, beginning with Delhi, New Delhi, and with the important milestone, the General Assembly in Canberra in 1991, and which is interesting to explore a bit, to understand the nature of the ecumenical text. I'd like to dwell more on this. This ecclesiology of communion really has a potentiality to be well received by the churches, for the reason that it is innate in the confessional ecclesiologies of the churches. I'd like to stress the difference between the confessional ecclesiologies and the ecumenical ecclesiology as it is being developed by the Faith and Order in the WCC. I think there is a difference between them. It is the same kind of difference that exists between the languages spoken by people and the Esperanto. Esperanto is an interesting language. It's an artificial construct which embodies elements from different languages, with the idea that, well, all people eventually will speak the same language, which consists of elements of their own languages. I think the same is the idea of the ecumenical ecclesiology, somehow, to pick up different pieces, bits and pieces from different confessional traditions and ecclesiologies, and to construct an artificial ecclesiology, which would be somehow appealing to all the traditions. As such, this idea is not awkward. As such, this idea is not bad, but it doesn't work. The same happened to Esperanto. No one wants to speak Esperanto. I think there is only one university where Esperanto is taught. I think in San Marino. I visited once. Well, it's not. It means it's not quite a popular language, doesn't it? So the same problem is with the ecumenical ecclesiology, I think, because it tries to function like Esperanto. It is excellent as an idea, but again, it faces the problem of reception. No one wants to speak this language. The churches prefer to speak their own confessional languages. The churches prefer to speak to maintain, to keep their own confessional ecclesiologies, traditions. They prefer to learn the other language in order to communicate, instead of switching to a completely artificial one, like Esperanto. And I think by employing the concepts like koinonia, the ecumenical documents, they try to avoid this problem, because I believe that the confessional traditions, the confessional ecclesiologies, be it Catholic, Orthodox, or Reformed, or Lutheran, or Anglican, all those confessional ecclesiologies, they keep their own principles. They stick to their own ecclesiologies, but they try to find a way of communicating to each other, even regardless of the ecumenical movement, even regardless of the WCC. And this happens in the way that they adopt the elements of the languages of each other. This is like, in every language, we have now a word for computer because there are computers everywhere. And we just adopt languages, things that help us to understand better each other, regardless what language we speak. I think in the same way function the languages of ecclesiological languages that try to bridge the confessional ecclesiologies. And I believe koinonia, the language of communion, is one of such languages. It is a language, an ecclesiological language. And every confession, every major confession, believes it is its own language. If we take the Orthodox, for instance, well, it was a trick of the WCC to use the Greek word koinonia, because the Greeks, they don't care very much about theology, they care about the Greek words. Koinonia is a Greek word, and it pleased them completely. They were bought out, by this word. But if we go even further, more profoundly, we see that the concept of koinonia is important for the Orthodox ecclesiology. It goes back to the concept of sobornos or komякov. We find the same concept in Bulgakov, in those modern ecclesiologies. I just found a quote from John Zezioulas, who speaks about this language of koinonia. I quote him: "The important thing, in my view, about this concept of koinonia is that it provides us with a key to deal with almost every ecumenical issue in a theological way based on a common faith on God as Holy Trinity. Thanks to this key concept, we can interrelate subjects such as Christology, pneumatology, anthropology, ecclesiology, etc. in an organic way. This concept can help us tackle issues such as church ministry, primacy, mission, etc., in faithfulness to our Trinitarian Christological faith, and in openness to the concerns of human beings in social and everyday life. With the help of this concept, we can liberate faith and order from its bondage to a theology which concerns only a caste of academics and clergy and remains indifferent and irrelevant to practical matters and existential concerns. Thus, the potential of such a concept for the ecumenical movement can be almost inexhaustible." So, John Zezioulas acknowledges that the concept of koinonia is very important for the Orthodox ecclesiology, and at the same time, it communicates to the wider communities. The same can be said about the Roman Catholic tradition. I think among many ecclesiological languages, during a long evolution of ecclesiology in the Catholic Church, the language of communion became a kind of official language of the Church. Some other languages were marginalized, like, well, neo-scholastic language, then even the language of some bits and pieces of the language produced by the theologians from Nouvelle Theologie. They were somehow put aside. But the language of communion was adopted. Well, people like Tillard, they stood behind this language, certainly. And imagine that even the Congregation for the Promotion of Faith under Cardinal Ratzinger at the time accepted completely this language as the official language of ecumenical activities of the Catholic Church. This was done first in 1985 by the Extraordinary Synod of the Bishops of the Catholic Church, and in 1992 in the letter of the Congregations for the Doctrine of Faith, titled "Some Aspects of the Church Understood as Communion." This letter of 1992, composed obviously by Ratzinger himself, the language of communion was accepted as really the most convenient instrument of ecumenical engagement of the Roman Catholic Church. And if we go to the Protestant or to the Protestant traditions, we certainly find a lot of great figures who stood behind the same language in that tradition. People like Karl Barth, Rudolf Bultmann, and of course Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote his famous dissertation Communicatio Sanctorum, appealing exactly to the concept of communion, of communication. So every tradition, every church tradition has appropriated this language as its own, and still it is a common language. And I think this is a feature on which our ecclesiological document has embarked. Because this document has subscribed to the same language in order to appeal to the churches. And I think this was a very wise step. This was a good decision to employ this language, which does not hover over the local ecclesiology or confessional ecclesiologies like Esperanto, but which tries to speak the languages of the traditions. So that's that's what I'd like to indicate as the background of this document, as the rationale behind employment of the language of communion for this document, as a hint to hope that this document will be received well by the churches and will repeat the success of the BAM and will make a step further beyond what the BAM has achieved. So now it's up to us to make this document a success, and I hope it, and I believe it deserves a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ordet ekonomi använder jag i betydelsen hela den bebodda världen, hela Guds hushåll. Och jag tycker det blir så stort när man tänker, vi hör de här orterna nämnas, Judeli, Busan, Lima, där samtal sker mellan kristna mellan kyrkor av och det stora med att ha Fader Cyril här är att vi har en av de som har suttit i de här väldigt övergripande samtalen. Man kan ju säga väldigt mycket på den nivån, så att säga. Men det är precis som Fader Cyril säger, att vad tar vi med oss hem? Hur blir ordet kött? Hur blir ordet människa? Hur får får de här
How does
orden
God
när
become man?
i våra egna kyrkor?
How does it
Våra
take
egna
place
församlingar.
in life in our
Hur
church
får
communion?
evangeliet om Jesus Kristus, den uppståndne,
That does the
vingar
gospel
sprider sig
of
till
the
samhället
resurrected Lord Jesus
genom
Christ,
att vi tar
how
emot
does it gain
ett
wings?
sånt här samtal?
How do we receive
Och därför
this?
så har ni fått några frågor på bordet
No,
och
you
nu
have
kommer vi till avdelningen
So,
fruktstund och
questions.
arbete i grupper.
You know, to work in the groups.
Ni får bestämma själva vad ni gör i grupper, men halv 5 och de här frågorna är en hjälp för att få det här mottagandet att ske. Det är lite olika mycket hur mycket vi har läst de här texterna, men vad har vi att säga om samtalen som sådan, den vi har lyssnat till och ekumeniken lokalt helt enkelt. Hur vill vi beskriva relationerna mellan kyrkorna i Sverige? Och vilken förnyelse utmanar kyrkorna att arbeta med? Kring vilka delar av kyrkans liv behövs fortsatt räcker det som infallsvinkel för vårt samtal till orden? Ja, gör det. Heja, prata!
Bring your chair.
Ja.